Hey everyone, Karl Bainbridge from INC Live once again. It's Monday, which means it's now time for our latest live recap. All roads point towards Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis fighting for the UFC heavyweight title, but the belt's next challenger may well come from this fight. It was Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov from the UFC Apex. Let's get to the fights. And we start with our main event where Ciryl Gane claimed a unanimous decision over Alexander Volkov, and in doing so becoming only the fourth man in heavyweight history to win his first 5 UFC fights. Now if we go back to February, we did a video talking about the main event he had against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and our feelings were very similar to the consensus of most fans. A fantastic technical performance to neutralise a dangerous fighter, but truth be told, it wasn't a classic. A lot of people criticised that fight for being dull. And a lot of what we said can be applied to last Saturday. First off, I think Volkov gave a much better showing than what Rozenstruik did. I love the work he was doing with leg kicks early to try and neutralise some of Gane's movement, and you can see since he bulked up he carries a lot more power than he used to. I personally thought he won the 4th round. I didn't really agree with Daniel Cormier trying to imply that there was a chance he won the 1st. But once again, like Rozenstruik, he couldn't handle the feints and the footwork of Ciryl. I want to stress why this is a fixation of mine. Like, heavyweight is a very high risk division, because these guys carry so much power. If you make one mistake, you're getting your lights turned off. So to have someone choosing this Muay Thai point style method of fighting and find so much success doing so as a heavyweight is incredibly impressive. Like, Ciryl Gane is 10-0 right now, and I can count on my hand the amount of times he's been in trouble. Like, I try and think of other heavyweight fighters who move in the way that he does. Like, Krokop possibly, but he was a bit flat-footed. And if you go away from that, Rico Verhoeven? And that's cheating because he's purely a kickboxer, he's not an MMA fighter. It's a unique style to watch, and as a combat sport enthusiast, it's something I find very appealing. The problem is the man on the street doesn't look for that. When they see a heavyweight main event, they expect a wild brawl, first round knockout. So a guy who is the antithesis of that, who's happy to stay on the outside, pick apart his opponents, it's not going to appeal to the everyday fan. And considering they make up about 90% of your fan base, and they are the ones who buy the majority of the pay-per-views, guys like Gane are going to get passed over for the Derek Lewises of the world. It's actually quite strange for me that a lot of the big criticisms that people have had over the heavyweight division have been that the majority of fighters are just fat guy brawlers who gas after 5 minutes. Yet you have Ciryl Gane, who answers all of those criticisms, and people still aren't happy. In a lot of ways, he sort of reminds me of Leon Edwards. You can be impressed with what he does technically, but the fans still consider them boring because they're not finishers. Now, whether they're right or wrong for doing that, that's another question for another day. I actually do think Gane was a lot more aggressive compared to how he was against Jair. Around sort of the 3rd round, he realised that Volkov didn't have much to trouble him, and he started pressuring him a lot more. He attempted some takedowns, which caught me off guard, so I'm happy to see him mix it up. The bloodlust in me would have liked to have seen Ciryl go for the finish, and we've seen in past fights, Dontel Mays, Junior Dos Santos, he is capable of piling it on to get the finish. But if this style's got him to the dance, why change it? I don't think we learned too much about Ciryl from this fight, but what it did do is make me think about him versus Francis. We've seen what Francis has done in his recent run, but can he do that against somebody who's so good at frustrating his opponents? And is Ciryl going to want to fight his normal style, knowing the risks that comes with that? Like Francis Ngannou, it's one punch. If he connects with you even slightly, you're going to go down. And when you add in the fact that the two used to be training partners, the UFC are wanting to do events in Africa or France, there's a lot of things that add up in its favour. The question is whether or not the UFC are going to pull the trigger when the everyday fan isn't sold on Ciryl. Personally, I'm all for it, but I'm not the person who matters. There's a lot of things I could talk about in terms of the rest of the card. Honestly, this for me was one of the stronger fight nights we've had for a long, long time. Like, Tanner Boser got probably the biggest win of his career. Personally, I don't think heavyweight is right for OSP, and he is a little bit past his prime. But it's a good name to have on Tanner's portfolio, and good on Daniel Cormier as well for apologising for the phantom cage grab, because that was a little bit of a controversy coming out of that one. Feely versus Pineda was turning into a cracking match before the eye poke, so I hope they run that one back. Julie Avila, for me, was one of the breakout stars of the event. Not so much her performance, but her personality with the post-fight press conference and the interview with DC. Women's bantamweight needs a lot more big personalities, and if Avila can have the performances to back up the personality, you could possibly be getting that. The guy I'm going to be focusing on though is Shavkat Rakhmonov. Second round submission over Michel Prazeres, and now he's on to 14-0. Now, I want to start with a few disclaimers. Prazeres is 39 years old, and there was a massive size difference between the two. But that doesn't take away the quality of Shavkat's performance. Prazeres has always been praised for his durability. In 21 years he's been fighting, he's never been finished in his career, and he's faced some top guys as well. Gilbert Burns, Tysonov, Kevin Lee, they couldn't do anything with him. Yet Rakhmonov made it look easy. He stayed behind the jab, which you expect given his size advantage, but when it went to the ground, where everyone expected Prazeres to be much more dominant, he made it look simple. We've had a lot of people at the end of last year who were calling for Khamzat to be fast-tracked. Now, I'm not really sold on the idea of people getting that kind of preferential treatment and getting number 3 or number 4 guys off 2 or 3 fights. But if I had to choose one person to get that kind of treatment, and this is a bit controversial, I would rather give it to Rakhmonov than Khamzat. He's faced better opponents. People forget that he subbed Cowboy Oliveira on his UFC debut, so that's a big scalp. When you compare that to Khamzat, who was fighting the guys like John Phillips, Reese McKee, Gerald Mershad, fairly middle-of-the-road fighters. I personally think Rakhmonov has faced better opponents. It's a new marker for the UFC, being from Kazakhstan. And personally, and again, I'm a little bit biased because I'm not really too sold on Khamzat. I think he's a better personality. He comes across a lot more likable. Admittedly, I'm a little biased. I kind of rated Rakhmonov when he was fighting on the regional scene. But personally, I've already seen enough that he deserves someone in the top 15. Like, you put him against someone like a Ponzinibbio, Robbie Lawler, The Leech, someone along those sort of lines, I think would be a good litmus test to see whether or not he's capable of holding his head up in the welterweight division. And welterweight needs new contenders. It's getting very stale at the top of that weight class. So having new blood like Rakhmonov, Khamzat, as I mentioned, Sean Brady, is going to seriously help the weight class. For me, a great fight card is when every match ends with some kind of talking point. And that's what we got on Saturday. Enjoyable show, and as a Brit, it was refreshing to watch it at a reasonable hour for once. I wasn't having to tape it and watch it on Sunday morning. A great outing for the UFC, and for me, a perfect starter for the main course in 2 weeks' time. No recap show next week, we don't have an event, but we will be getting a UFC 264 preview show. Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor 3, the Notorious One's last stand. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell so you never miss any of our content. We've got big hopes coming up for the live version of this channel, including that preview show in 7 days' time. This is the INC. Thank you for watching. Look forward to the show.